So, a young man asked a couple of questions on the YouTube channel. So I answered him in the comments on the YouTube channel, but I also said that I would answer those questions here because I think a lot of people may have those questions because, you know, after teaching this for a while, it's easy to lose sight. I remember when I was in college and I was trying to pass math, which was not an easy thing to do for me. And I had a math teacher who was a brilliant woman, a mathematician. And she was teaching set theory, which was one of the basic electric courses you could take. And I remember her saying in the class, she said, "I don't mean this personally," she said, "but the stuff that this class is about is so elementary and so basic that I'm not even sure how to talk about it." She was a nice woman, though. She was a chain smoker. That was in the days when you could smoke, you know, so she would smoke cigarettes while she was teaching the class. And she was nice. She said, "Just come to my office if you don't understand. Come to my office and I'll try and get you through this." And I spent a lot of time in her office, but I got through it. And you know, the reason I'm saying that is because this can be like that. You know, when you're teaching this for a number of years, you say things to people, you say things to students, and for you, it's like, okay, that's pretty clear, right? But the student that's hearing that, it might be, I have no idea what that means, you know, or how to understand that, right? So this young man said that he had read my book and that he looks forward to the talks on YouTube. And he said that the whole idea of, and I'm just paraphrasing, so forgive me, young man, if I don't say this exactly, but he said the idea of there being no person or no personality, you know, is something that is tricky for him. That, you know, that how do I be no personality, you know, or how is it that there's no personality? And then he went on to say that, and I think part of what he said is that if there's no personality, then would that mean that people that have mental health issues, that they're just mental health issues because they think they're a personality and that's the problem, that's why they have mental health issues? And if somebody who realizes that there is no personality has mental health issues, how do they get treated?
That's a good question.
It is a good question. And then he went on to the second question he had was, and he said that he has a girlfriend. And he said this idea of not being a person or not being a personality is a little tricky with his girlfriend because who's he in a relationship with? You know, how do they function as a relationship when there's no personality, right? Another good question. Yeah. And so, you know, what I said to him is, and I understand why this can be confusing because it has come out of my mouth that there's no personality. And it's come out of other teachers' mouth that there's no personality. But you have to understand something, first of all, and that is what we're speaking about can't be spoken of. So what we're saying is trying to get at it, you know, trying to get at it because it can't be gotten at because it's non-conceptual. But all we have is language, and so we're trying to get at it. We call it pointing to it. But then you the student, you the meditator, has to find a way to experience that non-conceptual reality when all you have to go on is what's being spoken, which is not it. So that's the kind of the dilemma. But although it's a dilemma, the possibility for realizing your true nature does exist. And it's one of the reasons that this whole process can be confusing. In fact, it's unavoidable for it to be confusing. It's unavoidable for it to be challenging. It's unavoidable for you, if you're serious, to get to a place where you feel so frustrated and desperate in terms of, what's wrong with me? How come I can't get this? I'm being told this experience is so readily available. Why can't I get this? I'm being told that this experience is, nothing has to change for me to be what I really am, but I don't know how to not change and be that. It just doesn't compute. So I understand. The thing is this: when we say there's no personality, what we're saying is that this, what we call personality, what people identify with to be the personality, they think that's me, that's myself, right? That's what I am. That's myself, okay? But if you examine it closely, what you see is that what you're identified with, what you consider to be yourself, is nothing other than a process of thinking. Because as I have indicated here, and as I have suggested to you, that without thinking, you can't maintain the idea that you exist as a personality, because it's being created in your thinking all the time. Without thinking, you're not experiencing being a personality. Well, in fact, you can never experience being a personality, because you're not. You are not that. So how can you ever experience being that? But you think you are experiencing being that, and you think you are that. So as long as you're paying attention to the thought process and you believe the thought process, then you identify with the thought process, and you have this belief that I am this personality. And then along with that comes all the stuff that comes along with the personality. I can tell you my story as a personality, the story of my life. I can tell you what I like and what I don't like. I can tell you, all these other characteristics about me and tendencies about me and everything. And these things seem to be real, to most psychologists who do psychotherapy. After all, they're saying my personality is disordered. So they must mean that I have one, right? Personality disorders, right? Well, yeah, in the conventional understanding in which psychotherapy is done, it's done within the agreement that everybody shares that the personality is what we are. And that is globally the agreement, is it not? I mean, human beings all over the world are being personalities. They believe they are personalities. They're thinking that they are a personality, just like they're being bodies and thinking that they're physical bodies, right? That's one of the reasons why these teachings and these practices are still, there's still so few people who are involved in it, and even fewer people who realize the truth and experiencing being what they actually are and living the life of what they actually are. Because there's no agreement about that in the world. There's no agreement about the truth in the world. What there's agreement about in the world is the appearances. What there's agreement about in the world is what everybody considers to be the way that things appear, the way things occur. I occur to be my body. I occur to be my personality based on the thinking activity that I identify with. I identify with the thinking activity. What I mean is that when thoughts happen there, that's me. That's me thinking. And when things happen, and actions happen and activities happen, that's me. This body is doing that. That's the common understanding. And just like the earth looks flat when it isn't, people believe that they are a physical body and a personality when they're not, right? And because that's a pervasive agreement, and because the game of life is getting played within that agreement, right, which is that we're not happy, we're going to pursue happiness, right? We're not peaceful, we're going to pursue peace. We're not satisfied, we're going to pursue satisfaction. That's the game of life that gets played in the reality where everybody agrees we're all personalities, right? Time is real, space is real, the physical body is real, and that's the life we're living. And so within that life, we do our best to get what we want. We do our best to seek pleasure, satisfaction, contentment, and peace. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for anybody. It can't possibly work because it's based on things that aren't true. But the game goes on, right? The game goes on because people believe that I seem to be happy at certain points, which is not really happiness, it's gratification. I'm happy when I get what I want. I'm happy when the circumstances are the way I want them to be. Therefore, happiness must be possible. All I have to do is keep getting the right circumstances, or keep the circumstances when I'm happy to stay that way, right? So that's why every Christmas, everybody's trying to get this Christmas to be like the one that they really enjoyed, right? And it's usually disappointing, right? So people try and hold on to the experiences that they thought were related to happiness, that were a function of circumstances. They try and hold on to, I was happy when I was a young person, or happier when I thought I was happier when I was a young person because I had a younger body, I looked better than I look now, I had more energy, I had a lot of friends, life was easier, I didn't have to pay a mortgage, right? And so that's what I'm trying to recapture at the plastic surgeon. Or that's what I'm trying to recapture, later on in life, in my midlife crisis, by creating some kind of circumstance that brings me back to that happy point. But the reality of it is, what we're talking about when we say there's no such thing as a personality, we're saying that there is no self as a personality, that there is no you that's a personality, that this personality got put together through conditioning. You have to remember it because it doesn't exist really, it only exists in a memory. You remember your name. You have practiced being the person with that name so long now that it's very easy for you to know that that's your name. When there was a time when that wasn't true, when you had to really think, oh yeah, what's my name? As you get older and the dementia sets in, you may go back to trying to remember your name again. But that's the way it is in this life of a personality where everything is coming and going and everything is constantly changing and everything is unstable. But the key to the teachings is that it's not real, it's not true that you are this. And that's the reason that there is suffering, because you're trying to experience the impossible. You're trying to be happy as something that's not alive. You're trying to be satisfied as something that's not alive. The personality is not alive. Personality doesn't have awareness. The personality doesn't have consciousness. The personality is an activity. It's a mental activity. It's a thought process. It's like a computer program. You wouldn't have difficulty understanding that you're not a computer program. You wouldn't have difficulty understanding that, right? Well, you have difficulty understanding that you're not this program, this thought process that's called a personality, because you're identified with it. You think that the output, you think that the output that it's producing, like a computer program, you think that the output it's producing, you're producing. You think that the thoughts that get generated there, you're creating those thoughts, which creates a lot of confusion, right? Because as I have talked about here, some thoughts, you know that it's possible for you to think a thought, right? If I tell you right now, think the thought, imagine the thought, or think the thought red, white, and blue, you can do that. You can actually cause that thought to happen, right? You can even imagine the colors, right? So then the confusion begins, because then we figure, well, that's evidence that I'm thinking my thoughts, right? But then when I try to go to sleep at night and I'm having all these negative thoughts about what happened today and what's going to happen tomorrow, and it feels like they're happening to me instead of my thinking them, and I want them to stop, but I can't make them stop. Now I'm confused, because I have times when I experience that I can produce thoughts, but there are a lot of other times when thoughts seem to be happening to me that I'm not producing, right? And then I'm suffering because I can't stop those thoughts from happening. Those thoughts cause me to be afraid, they cause me to be depressed, etc., etc. This is called neuroticism. This is called neuroticism, a mild mental disorder, right? So the reason that happens, and the reason the Buddha said life is suffering, is because if the way you're living life, if who you're being in the world is not real, and if who you're being in the world is neurotic, right, then life is suffering. You can never actually be happy, because the only real happiness that's possible is the happiness for what you really are, which is the awareness, which is the consciousness. But you're ignoring that. You've got all your eggs in the basket. You've got all your money in the bank of identifying with the thought process and identifying with the physical body. So you got a losing horse that you're riding. You got a horse that can't win, can't possibly win, right? Because it's an imaginary horse. So the thing is this, it's not that the personality doesn't exist. It's that it doesn't exist as an actual reality. It doesn't exist like a being. It doesn't exist like an aware, alive, awake experience, which is what your true nature is. It doesn't exist like that. And so we say in Buddhism, they say there's no self. The teaching is there's no self. The realization of no self is the realization of transcendental wisdom. So no self, wait a minute. You said you're saying that the personality is not who we are, and the personality is not real. It exists, yes it exists, but it exists as a thought process, but it's not real. And who we are is actually the awareness or the consciousness, right? But then you say there's no self, that this teaching is no self. So aren't you saying that the real self that I am is the awareness, right? Or the consciousness? Then there is a self, isn't there? But the teachings is that there's no self. Well, what do they mean by that? Well, the reason they say that is because the consciousness that we are, the reality of what we are, and now I'm saying the reality of what we are, is that this consciousness and that consciousness and your consciousness and everybody else's consciousness is exactly the same. It's exactly the same, right? So is it personal? Is it separate and individual? If it's not separate and individual and it's not personal, then do you have a personal self? Do you have a separate self? This is what's meant by no self. Awareness is not your individual, separate, long-lasting self. Awareness is not personal. Awareness is universal. Awareness is shared by all of humanity. It's exactly the same. And this is what they mean by no self. This is the experience you have when you begin to experience your true nature, because when you begin to experience your true nature, all there is the awareness of what's happening. That awareness is not personal. That awareness is not separate from what's happening. That awareness and what's happening are one reality happening. That's what non-duality is. It's one reality happening, okay? So, going back to that question, to be clear, that the idea that there's no personality, or the personality doesn't exist, what we mean by that is it's not real. Doesn't have awareness. It's not what you are, is what we mean by that. It's not real, it's not what you are. Now, it is what we traffic in. It is what we traffic in, right? It's not what you really are, but in order to function in the world, you have to use it, right, to exist in the world. You have to use it. You can't be here as awareness. What would that look like? It wouldn't look like anything. You wouldn't be here as awareness because it has no form, right? So you have to operate in form. You have to operate as a personality. The key is to know that while you're operating as a personality, you're not actually the personality. You're using it. It's a persona. It's a mask. It's a character you're playing in life, like that. Now, when it comes to mental health, right, that character that you're playing in life can have mental disorders. That character can have been exposed to conditions growing up, right, that result in some serious personality disorders. But they're not your disorders, they're the disorders of the personality. They're not your disorders, they're the disorders of the conditioning that occurred that formed the personality that you have, which may be dysfunctional. It may be even sociopathic. You may be even a murderer because of that. Or a psychopathic politician. I won't go there. But that's all because of what occurred. When people were babies, Hitler and anybody else Hitler and Mother Teresa were exactly the same when they were babies. It was the conditioning that ended him up being Hitler and ended her up being a saint, right? But behind that, they're both exactly the same. Even when one is a monster and the other is a saint, behind the personality, they're both exactly the same. In the world, they're very different. And in the world, one's dangerous and one's not dangerous, right? So the mental health issue is something that has to do with the personality. And in conventional psychology, right, the conventional psychologists themselves believe that they are their body and they are personality. And as a psychologist or a therapist that believes that they are personality and they are a body, they're treating other personalities and other bodies that are disordered. That's the conventional approach to psychology, and that's why you have personality theories, right? You have treatment models, you have all these different understandings that help us to understand what the personality really is and how it gets put together. You have the psychoanalytic model, right? You have the model that Carl Rogers came up with, you know, the client-centered model. You have the CBT model now, that it's about treating the disordered thinking. You have Gestalt therapy. You have all kinds of ways of approaching dealing with the personality and all kinds of theories about the personality. And the reason that the theories of the personality exist, there's so many different theories, right, is because since there is no real personality, and since everybody's personalities are completely different, how are you going to come up with a model that fits? So there's the model of the day, you know, there's the current understanding of it, right? But now what's happening is with non-dual understanding and with the spiritual integration that's going on in psychology, there's a whole new reality that's opening up that talks about the fact that if you realize your true nature, if you understand non-duality, if you know you're not a personality and you know awareness is your true nature, and you bring that into the process of doing psychotherapy, it's a whole different reality, because now you have some solid ground to stand on that stays the same all the time. And you can do treatment from that solid ground that stands the same all the time and help the person come to the realization that you're not who you think you are, and all the problems you have are a function of the mistake you have about who you are that results in mistaken thinking, mistaken behavior, you know, irrational emotions, inappropriate, you know, situations that you find yourself in and so forth, and an ongoing process of experiencing failing in life in terms of not ever being able to maintain happiness, peace of mind, and satisfaction. So in this new model now, what we're doing an integration in which if you can understand and utilize meditation, for example, to realize your true nature as the awareness, from the awareness position, you can make very dramatic and profound changes to the personality, because now the personality is not who you're being. If you're being the personality, right, and you identify with the personality, it's not easy for you to hear negative things about yourself, right? Which is what has to happen in a process of psychotherapy. The therapist has to break the news to you, you know, that you're neurotic or psychotic or you're, you know, whatever the issues are that you have that are causing the problems in your life, and help you to work through that stuff, right? But when you realize your true nature, it becomes easier to do that kind of work, because you realize that you're not the personality. It's much easier to take responsibility for the personality, and it's much easier to make dramatic changes in the personality, because you're not inside of it now trying to change it. You're not inside of it trying to change it. You can see it from outside, and you can see it more clearly, and you can make dramatic changes a lot faster on the personality. In fact, the way the changes get made on the personality is not by actually tinkering with it so much, not by actually tinkering with the thought process or tinkering with the trauma from the past or all the other ways that conventional psychology deals with it, but the realization of your true nature itself can bring about profound and dramatic changes in the personality. Because when you're looking at what the personality is doing from the real you, from the truth, from the actual awareness that you are, in the light of that awareness, it sees the personality for what it is. It sees it as a dysfunctional model. It sees it as a mistaken identity. And when that's seen from the light of awareness, just the fact that it's being seen that way from the truth of what you are has it change. Has it changed. You don't have to try and practice manipulating it, and catching the wrong thinking, right? It all happens in a very natural way once you start to get your feet on some real ground. Once you get your feet on the reality that is the truth of what you are. So in relationships, right, how does it work in relationships? Well, the way that works in relationship is to the degree to which you know you're not your conditioning, the degree to which you know you're not your personality, you stop being that and expressing that in the relationship. Right? Now, what does that mean? Well, if you're being your personality, the nature of the personality is to be judgmental, right? To judge and evaluate, right? That's its nature all the time. It's doing that, right? So if you're in a relationship as a personality, sooner or later you're going to be judging and evaluating the other person. And they're going to be doing that with you. And sooner or later you're going to have differences. And sooner or later the personality, which one of its primary ways of existing is to dominate and avoid domination. So sooner or later you and the person that you fell in love with, right? Falling in love is like a disease. It's like a virus. It's not something that is realistic. It's something that's necessary for procreation, right? People have to fall in love so they have sex and make babies, right? But after that calms down, after the virus passes and you go back to your regular state of personality, then you start seeing the faults in the other person and you start having the disagreements mean a lot. And so you have to start negotiating. It's like two countries negotiating, so there's not a war. And that's what goes on. But if you understand the truth, and even one of the two people starts to wake up and realize their true nature and starts to relate to the other person's true nature, even if the other person doesn't know what's going on, right? It changes everything, because now you don't take it personally, you don't take who they're being personally, you don't take yourself personally, and your interest is on just what will work to have the personality fulfill its possibility, fulfill the potential that exists there. And what will work is unconditional love. What will work is unconditional love. In other words, if you're going to be in a relationship with somebody and you want to have the relationship work, right, then you don't stop paying attention to the differences. Stop paying attention to the areas that your mind presents to you that are problematic or that you're in conflict with the person. In other words, the way they should be, and they think the way you should be, and if you would change or they would change, then it would work. You stop paying attention to all that stuff, and you start paying attention to the reality of who that individual is and the reality of who you are. And when you start relating to each other that way, right, the other stuff starts to fall away and stops being so important. And you find yourself having a lot more time without conflict, having a lot more time feeling unconditional love for the other person and enjoying being in the relationship. And you find yourself being interested in taking care of and giving to the other person instead of getting from the other person. You know, when people are identified with the personality in a relationship, you often hear them say, my needs aren't getting met, right? You're not meeting my needs, right? That's typical personality talk, right? Or if only you would change, we could be happy, right? That's typical personality talk. But when you wake up, those kinds of things aren't running the show anymore. When you wake up, you realize that if that's what you're going to give your attention to, if that's how you're going to be identified in this relationship, you might as well get a lawyer now. You might as well either get a lawyer now or realize that you're going to be living alone together for a long time. And you're just getting along like you're going to have ceasefires. That's the way you're going. And isn't it interesting that that's how this kind of thing plays out internationally? Isn't it? We have to have ways. We have to have diplomacy. That's how we'll survive this. We'll have to have diplomacy. What's that mean? Well, I'll give you a little bit of what you want. You give me a little bit of what I want, and we'll find some common ground. But don't violate it. If you violate it, right? And then you have the NATO, the organizations, right? The NATO in personalities is your family and their family, right? So if the shit goes down, you have the whole family to fight their family. This is called insanity, by the way. So I just wanted to say a little bit about those questions, and I really appreciate those questions, and I hope that what I've just said helps to open it up a little, helps to add some clarity to the issues that people experience around that. And I hope that you realize that all you have to do in order to realize the possibility that this offers, right, is to pay attention to what's going on. Slow down and actually look at what's going on and watch when thoughts occur in your mind. When thoughts occur in your mind that are thoughts about protecting yourself or avoiding things or getting what you want or being in control, you start to pay attention to those thoughts and realize they're the thoughts that are going to generate a crazy life. So just by understanding the truth and practicing meditation and breaking up this hold this grip that your mind has on your life that's causing all the suffering, right? You can start paying attention and not identifying with it. Stop identifying with it and start identifying with the truth. Start identifying with your true nature, with the awareness itself. Is it easy? No, it's not easy because you've been practicing being crazy for a long time. And your craziness is so infused, it's so infused in what you are, that your identity is crazy. Who you consider yourself to be is crazy, denying that. Who you consider yourself to be is crazy. And anybody, if you start to really objectively look at your behavior, and this is true for most of us, you will see how crazy you are. But you don't ever stop and look objectively about how you behave because you're being the one behaving and justifying it. So you have to pay a therapist to tell you the truth. It's an interesting living. Well, it's not a waste of time because there is a certain degree to which you can recondition the conditioning. People can change. Not much, but they can change. And even after they change, they can fall back into the same grooves again, right? So it's unstable. And in psychiatry, you said psychiatry. Psychiatry is more, some psychiatrists do psychotherapy, but most psychiatrists do medication, right? Even that's useful because some people need to be medicated. It slows them down a little bit, it keeps them from being so violent or so dangerous, right? And some people need to be medicated so that they can get some rest from being who they are. You know what I mean? Some people need medication to sleep at night so they can stop torturing themselves, right? So in both cases, we're not saying that, I'm not saying that psychiatrists and psychologists or psychotherapy is all a waste of time and no. It has a certain value, but the value that it was thought to have prior to the new understandings that are coming into play is changing, and now we're realizing that there's a new frontier, there's a new possibility for working with human behavior and for working with people to realize their true nature and realize the possibility of having a fulfilling life, a high quality of life, right? So that's now coming into play, and it doesn't mean that we're still not dealing with thinking as something that has to be dealt with in psychotherapy, right? But the way we're dealing with it is not thinking, we're not dealing with it like you're thinking the thoughts and so you have to change what you're thinking. No. With this new way of dealing with it, you're not thinking the thoughts, but you need to pay attention to them because they're driving you crazy and making you act stupid a lot. Any other questions? Yeah.
So even though by what you're saying, we can take the blame off of ourselves if our lives haven't worked out the way we wanted or expected because it was our conditioning that did that. Mm-hmm. But it still doesn't, in my case anyway, help to silence the thoughts in the head and things like that.
That takes practice. Yeah. That's why we're here. That's why we're here. Mm-hmm. And you've got to have faith and trust in the process that meditation is, and trust the people who are teaching it, and trust the models that exist. Trust that there are people who, through the practice of meditation and through the practice of studying the teachings of the truth, have realized their true nature and living as that true nature and experiencing satisfaction, peace, and happiness. You have to have faith in that and trust it. But even with the faith and the trust in that, there's no free lunch. That's why I say, you're not a meditator, you're not a meditator and you don't have a meditation practice unless you're doing it every single day. And unless you understand how important it is to do it every single day, and to do it sincerely, and to do it earnestly, and to do it consistent with how it needs to be done and consistent with the teachings. And even after having done that, the time will have to come when the formal practice starts to translate into applying the practice to your everyday existence. In other words, in order to be successful in the ordinary way that this occurs, because there are extraordinary circumstances where people just wake up because they bang their head.
Yeah.
They happen to be ripe enough that that happens, but it's extraordinary, it's not ordinary. In the ordinary course of events, you're going to have to take responsibility for the condition you're in, and even though you can forgive yourself for all the things you may have done in the past that were stupid and caused trouble for you and other people, even though you should forgive yourself for that, you have to still accept the fact that you're going to be held accountable for that. You have to take responsibility for what you did, even if it was your conditioning that did it, right? That's the way it is in the world that we live in. So this is not an easy thing to do. This whole process of practicing meditation the way it's meant to be done, this whole process of learning, studying and learning what the traditions and the teachings are telling us, and really making an effort to go through the confusion and to go through the paradox, to start to see things more clearly, and to be committed to the ongoing opening up that is, where you keep seeing more and more of the truth, and therefore are able to behave more and more consistent with the reality of who you are. Obviously, it's not easy. That's why there's so few people involved. And obviously, it's not easy. That's why there are so few people that succeed. If over time, I mean, mindfulness has become a fashionable thing, meditation has become a fashionable thing. These ancient teachers from the East have migrated to the West, and now we have a whole new generation of contemporary Western teachers, like Rupert Spira and Eckhart Tolle and Aji Shanti. You know, there's more and more showing up all the time. It's become an industry. But we do have contemporary Western teachers now that are talking about these things that were esoteric and difficult to understand from the East because they were in other languages that had to be translated and all the rest of it. But now we have contemporary teachers like myself, who is, as a psychologist, I've studied all these things and I've done a lot of work to understand and interpret them. So I can talk to people about it in a way that's more understandable and gives you more access to what this is all about. That's why I do this, because I know that it makes a difference, and I know that if I can help somebody to wake up and alleviate the suffering that's going to go on for the rest of their life, then it's a compulsion to do that. It's like having the cure for cancer. You know, what are you going to do? Keep it to yourself? Well, the practicing of it is applying conceptual understanding, right? And practicing something that's an activity that you're actually moving attention, right? But the outcome of all that at some point is that because to make the transition from what's conceptual to what's non-conceptual, right? That has to go through a process that's almost like being born. Do you know what I mean? It has to go through a process where it gets, and the way this happens is the personality tries to wake up and become enlightened, right? And as the personality does that, because it doesn't know what else to do, as the personality does that, it gets worse and worse and worse. It gets more desperate and more desperate and more frustrated, right? And it really has to go that way, because after the compression gets tight enough, after the contraction gets tight enough, it'll expand. And you have to trust that that's the case. You can see this happening in many versions of that, you know. For example, you know, I mentioned this the other day, that one of the few things that still really upsets me is doing taxes, right? And so when I was doing my taxes, I was experiencing this contraction. I was experiencing this upset. I was experiencing this neurotic state that was very uncomfortable, you know. And I realized at the time that was happening, but I could do nothing about it. You know, this was something that got triggered. This was a neural pattern that got triggered that brought up fear, you know, fear that they're going to come and take me away and lock me up because my taxes weren't correct or whatever the case may be, right? Typical, you know, paranoid stuff about the government and taxes and all the rest of it, right? So I was going through that. It was very uncomfortable. I felt the contraction. It was very uncomfortable. But it was good that I realized, wow, this is one of the few things that happens like this anymore. It used to be every day I would suffer like this about everything. Right? But now it's just once in a while when I do the taxes. So after I finally got done with the taxes, right, and I pushed the button, and, and sent the taxes in, so it was done, right, and I could tell my wife what the damage was, right. The next morning I woke up and it was like, wow. You know what I mean? Because once everything that contracts will expand, your life is a perpetual process of contraction and expansion, right? Usually it's within a certain realm that, it doesn't expand past this and it doesn't contract past this, right? But then there's certain things in life that make the contraction really, really worse than it ever was. But after that's over, right? After that's over, if you've done enough work that you can return to your natural state, there's a huge expansion that happens after that. It's an interesting thing. It's interesting because even the heart is a contraction expansion operation, right? The entire body is a contraction expansion operation. Life itself is contracting and expanding all the time, right? So when you wake up, the expansion and the contraction starts to be a lot more dramatic, right? And then at some point, there's an experience of that in which the expansion and contraction is occurring instead of being identified with the expansion and contraction, which is consciousness itself. So the expansion and contraction is consciousness, and that consciousness is paradoxical in the sense that it never changes and never moves, and at the same time, it's changing and moving.